My name is Renata Cole. I'm 36 years old, and I spent 14 years as a Navy hospital corpsman learning exactly how fast a child's body gives up its heat to the air. So when my neighbor's name lit up my phone at 11:15 on a night the sirens had been going since supper, and I heard my 7-year-old daughter's teeth chattering through the speaker instead of her voice, something in me locked into place that has never unlocked since. My parents called it discipline. They called it building character. They'd raised me the exact same way, and they liked to remind me, often, that I turned out just fine. What my father said to me on his porch that night, with my daughter's ruined sneakers still sitting on a neighbor's doormat, was ugly. What he and my mother did in a courtroom 5 weeks later was worse. And what I finally did about it, after 14 years of following orders and 36 years of keeping every uncomfortable family silence exactly where it was told to stay. Nobody in my family saw that coming. Not even me, if I'm honest. If you're the kind of person who believes love without safety isn't really love at all, stay with me. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because this story doesn't end the way my parents expected. That night I was 90 minutes away in Springfield, sitting in a windowless hotel conference room with 30 others separating service members, learning how to turn a decade and a half of triage and trauma care into bullet points on a civilian RA summit. The workshop had run long. The tornado watch had gone up around 8:30. Severe thunderstorm warning, 3 counties, including Wren County, where my parents' place sits on 11 acres outside the town of Millbrook, and where my daughter Sadie was spending her scheduled weekend. I'd been checking the radar between slides out of pure habit. The cell sitting over Miller's Bend was glowing a deep, ugly red. At 11:15, my phone lit up with a number I'd made Sadie memorize before her very first overnight stay. Louise Tandy, the retired schoolteacher who lives across the gravel road from my parents. I stepped into the hallway. Renata, honey, I've got her. She's safe, she's here with me. Behind Louise's voice I could hear my daughter crying. And underneath the crying, I heard the thing 14 years of training wouldn't let me hear. That fast, ragged clicking rhythm of a small body shaking hard enough to chatter its own teeth. How long was she out there? I asked. Not hello. Not what happened. Louise paused just a half-second too long. Long enough, Renata. You come on now. I was in the parking lot before she finished the sentence. 14 years in uniform teaches you a specific kind of calm. Your hands run the checklist while your chest is screaming underneath it. Blankets from the trunk. Water bottle from the console. Route pulled up on my phone. Urgent care hours checked at a red light, out of instinct, before I even knew I'd need them. I drove 90 minutes through rain coming down sideways, wipers maxed out, and somewhere around the county line, I noticed a detail I have never once managed to put down since. My phone showed 0 missed calls, not one. My parents had my number memorized. Their granddaughter was outside in that storm. Neither one of them ever dialed it. To understand that night, you need the 10 years before it. I enlisted the summer after high school and gave the Navy 14 years. Corpsman training, 2 deployments attached to a Marine unit, a shadow box of ribbons that fits on one bookshelf. Sadie was born when I was 28, stationed at Camp Lejeune. Her father, Danny, works oil rigs off the Gulf now. We split when she was 3, no drama, just 2 exhausted people closing a business gently. He sends support on time and calls when the rig schedule allows. Then came orders I couldn't turn down. 11 months at a hospital in Guam, unaccompanied, no dependents authorized. Every military parent knows the document that makes a deployment like that possible. A family care plan. Mine had 2 names on it, Earl and Patricia Cole, my parents, retired, respected in their little corner of Wren County, living in the same farmhouse where I grew up. Probate court made it official. Temporary guardianship of a minor child, signed by me at a folding table with a notary present, 5 days before my flight. I don't cry easily. I'll tell you that signature is the heaviest thing my hand has ever done. For 11 months, things looked fine, or looked like fine from 6,000 miles away. Sunday video calls. Good report cards. Sadie learned to name cloud formations and gather eggs from the coop. My mother baked. My father, a man who had been hard and unyielding through my entire childhood, seemed almost gentle with a granddaughter, softer than I'd ever once seen him with me. I came home 7 months before that storm. Retired at 36 with a pension, a plan, and a rented two-bedroom on Larkspur Street in Millbrook, 15 minutes from the farm. Here's the detail that ends up mattering more than anything else in this story: the guardianship paperwork I'd signed before Guam was still legally alive. A court document doesn't expire just because a mother comes home. I filed the motion to terminate it the same week I unpacked my boxes. My attorney, a sharp, unshakable woman named Priya Anand, told me the probate docket would take about 6 weeks. Routine, she said. In the meantime, her advice was simple: keep it cooperative. Don't yank the child away while the motion's pending. Judges notice hostility. So we ran a transition schedule. Sadie lived with me full-time and stayed overnight at the farm every other weekend. I want to be clear, because I know how this sounds. I did not send my daughter into that house blind. I'm a medic. Risk assessment is something I do in my sleep. I made Sadie memorize my number and Louise's number both. I called her every night at 8 sharp, no exceptions. I told her, if anything ever feels wrong, you find a phone, or you find Miss Louise's porch light, and you will never, ever be in trouble for it. My father had been hard on me growing up. Hard is too small a word, but I'd watched him gentler with Sadie for 11 months over a video screen with my own eyes. I had a schedule. I had a checklist. I had done everything a careful mother does. Q2 that Saturday, my 8 o'clock call went to voicemail. That Saturday, there was a statewide severe thunderstorm warning. Louise Tandy's porch light was the only warm thing glowing on that gravel road when I pulled in at 10 that night. She had Sadie wrapped in a quilt on her couch, an old barn cat purring against her feet. The second I knelt down, my hands started their own checklist without asking permission. Pulse, fingertips, lips, the back of her neck. Her lips still carried a faint bluish tinge. Her hair had dried into stiff little ropes. Her skin had that clammy coolness I remembered from soldiers caught out in a downpour during field exercises, except she weighed 50 pounds and she was mine. "Mama," she said, and grabbed a fistful of my sleeve like a drowning person, and didn't let go for close to an hour. Louise talked while I checked Sadie over, in the calm, measured voice of a woman who'd taught second grade for 3 decades. She'd been up watching the storm when something started banging against her storm door a little before 11. She opened it to find my daughter standing on the mat, soaked through, a limb freshly split off the old sycamore, across the road from a lightning strike. Sadie had been on my parents' back porch, locked out, told to stand there, until she could act her age. For the better part of 45 minutes, before something in the sky finally broke something loose in her, and she ran 200 yards through mud toward the only light she could see. On the mat by Louise's front door sat Sadie's sneakers. Her favorite pair. Purple with silver laces. Caked in so much mud they looked poured from clay. But the thing that finished me was what Sadie whispered when I tucked the quilt up under her chin. "I did what you said, Mama. I found the light." A pause. "And before that, I counted the thunder so I wouldn't cry." Across the road through the rain, my parents' kitchen window was still lit. They were awake, they knew. And nobody had come looking. I left Sadie asleep against Louise's shoulder and walked across that road in the rain, because some conversations don't wait for morning. My mother answered the door in her apron. My mother wears an apron at 11 at night the way other people wear armor. And her eyes went everywhere except my face. "Renata, it's late." Behind her, my father sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee, dry and comfortable, a man entirely at peace with his evening. "She's over at Louise's, I take it," he said before I'd said a single word, like I'd come to report the weather. I asked him what had happened. He told me in the exact tone you'd use describing a repaired fence line. Sadie had cried at bedtime because my mother took her tablet away. The crying didn't stop fast enough. Crying, in Earl Cole's house, is a behavior, and behaviors get corrected. So he'd walked her out to the back porch in her pajamas, told her she could come in when she could act her age, and set the latch. "Kids today are soft," he said. "A little weather never killed anybody. Put some backbone in 'em." My mother stood at the counter, wiping a dish that was already clean. I asked how long the latch had stayed shut. My father actually glanced up at the clock above the stove and did the arithmetic. Calm, satisfied arithmetic. The math of a man reviewing a job well done. That's the moment I understood something that took the rest of this story for me to say out loud: he wasn't ashamed. He wasn't defensive. Nothing on his face was hiding anything. Because in his own accounting, nothing wrong had happened in that house. You can argue with a guilty man. I was standing in front of something else entirely. I kept my voice level, because 14 years of training doesn't evaporate in one kitchen. I told him she's 7. I told him there'd been a severe thunderstorm warning, that lightning had split a tree limb 60 feet from where he'd latched that door. My father set his mug down and looked at me with something close to disappointment, not in himself, in me. Storm's just water, Renata. I stood worse at her age. So did you. He let that hang there. Then he said the sentence this entire story turns on. The one he'd been saying my whole life. The one I'd carried through 2 deployments like a stone in my pocket. It never hurt you. Here's the strange part, the part I didn't tell a single soul for weeks. When he said it, my mind threw an image at me, fast and unwanted, the way a bad knee reports old damage before rain arrives. Cedar planks. A hasp block. The smell of wood smoke and cold concrete. It was there for 1 second, and I put it away the way I'd been putting it away for 27 years. Because I had a job in front of me, and the job was my daughter. I picked up Sadie's overnight bag from the mudroom. Already packed, sitting by the door. Before I'd even arrived, and said the only thing left that was safe to say. She won't be back. My father shrugged and reached for his coffee. My mother followed me out onto the porch, into the rain, clutching her cardigan, and whispered the family motto like a prayer. Don't make this bigger than it is, Renata. Your father is a good man. Behind her, through the screen door, I could hear him rinsing his mug. Calm as Sunday morning. I got Sadie home to Larkspur Street at 3:30 in the morning. Dry pajamas, warm milk with honey, my bed instead of hers. She slept. I didn't try. I sat at my kitchen table with a folder I hadn't opened since spring, and read the guardianship papers by the light over the stove. Twice, the way you'd study an enemy position. There it was, in the clean, careful language courts use for messy human things, Earl and Patricia Cole, guardians of the person of a minor child, still in force. Termination hearing, 4 weeks out. I texted Priya at 4:15, not expecting an answer, and got one in under 5 minutes. Because apparently good attorneys don't sleep either. Her reply put ice water in my stomach. Until a judge rules otherwise, they remain the legal guardians. Keep Sadie with you. Document everything. But understand, technically, tonight, they could demand her back, and we'd be the ones out of compliance. I sat with that a long time. The 2 people who'd latched a door against my shivering daughter held more legal weight over her than I did. I'd signed that away to serve my country, and now it hung over my kitchen table like its own kind of weather. Around 6, I watched the storm drag its tail east, made coffee, and made a decision along with it. There's a version of this story where I sit quiet for 4 weeks and let a hearing sort it all out politely. Millbrook would have preferred that version. Instead, when Wren County Urgent Care opened at 8, my daughter and I were the first ones through the door. The urgent care shares a parking lot with the co-op feed store, which tells you most of what you need to know about my hometown. The doctor on duty was young, thorough, patient. She checked Sadie head to toe and wrote it all down in the flat, clinical language that will never capture a night like ours: prolonged cold and rain exposure, approximately 45 minutes. Presenting with resolved shivering, no hypothermia requiring admission. Emotional distress noted. Sadie, who answers adults honestly because I raised her that way, told the nurse everything without realizing she was telling anybody anything. Grandpa said the rain would make me stop crying, she said, swinging her feet off the exam table. It didn't work. I just got quiet. Their nurse's pen stopped moving. Her eyes came up and found mine over my daughter's head, and we had one of those silent conversations women have been having with each other forever. Out in the hallway, there's a poster I must have walked past a dozen times that year without ever reading it. Mandated reporters. It explains that certain professionals are legally required to report suspected abuse or neglect. The nurse was one. The doctor was one, standing in that hallway. I understood the machinery was likely going to start moving, whether I touched it or not. And I had a choice about what kind of mother I wanted to be, standing inside that machinery, dragged along by it, or walking in on my own 2 feet. I asked the front desk for a quiet corner, pulled out my phone, looked up Wren County Child Protective Services, and dialed it myself. The intake worker's name was Coleman, kind in the efficient way of people who hear terrible things for a living. He asked my name, my relationship to the child, and the names of the people I was reporting. And that is how, on a Sunday morning in the town where I was baptized, I found myself spelling out my own parents' names, letter by letter, into a government file. Earl Cole, Patricia Cole. Address County Road 9. My voice stayed level the whole time. My hand stayed still. 14 years of training. The shaking always waits until the work is finished, and it kept its schedule that morning too. Hit me in the parking lot afterward like a delayed-in voice. I want to be honest about what that call cost, because people who've never made one imagine it feels righteous. It doesn't. It feels like closing a door in the house you grew up in, and hearing the lock catch behind you. In Millbrook, family handles family. You don't call the county on your own blood. Not for drinking, not for bruises, not for anything. I knew the rule. I'd been raised marinating in it. I broke it anyway, with my daughter eating a granola bar in the waiting room, because somewhere between Louise's couch and that hallway poster, I'd done the math. Every adult in Sadie's life had followed that rule, generation after generation, and the rule is exactly how a latch door gets handed down a family like an old recipe. Coleman gave me a case number. I wrote it on the back of my hand like a soldier logging a coordinate. 2 by dinner the next day. My mother was on my porch holding a casserole dish like a passport. Because in her world, food is how you cross a border. I let her into the kitchen and no further. Sadie stayed in her room, and both of us knew exactly why. My mother got to it fast for her. The county had called the farm. A caseworker wanted to interview them. You have to stop this, Renata. Withdraw it. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. I asked which part was the misunderstanding. The latch, the lightning, or the 45 minutes. She flinched at the number and recovered fast. Then my mother, a woman who has never once in my hearing raised her voice, laid out her entire constitution in 2 sentences. Family handles family. We do not send the government into each other's houses. He locked a 7-year-old outside during a tornado watch, Mom. You watched him do it. But she came back with the second half of the family catechism. The one she'd been saving. The one that landed harder than anything my father had said, because she offered it up as comfort. He raised you the exact same way, honey. And you turned out just fine. She reached across my counter and patted my hand when she said it. You turned out fine. There it was. My entire childhood notarized in 4 gentle words, by the woman who had witnessed every bit of it. I looked at her hand on mine. The same hand that had wiped a clean dish while her granddaughter shivered on a neighbor's couch, and understood I was probably never going to reach her. What stayed with me after she left wasn't the arguing. It's that in 40 minutes on my porch and in my kitchen, my mother never once asked how Sadie was sleeping. 3 days later, a thick envelope arrived from the Wren County Probate Court. My parents were not going quietly. They'd hired a firm out of the county seat and filed a formal objection to my motion, arguing I had voluntarily absented myself from my daughter's life for nearly a year, that the child was thriving in their stable, established home, that my own living situation was recent and unproven, my employment not yet secured. Page 4 had a line that stopped my breath cold, neat as a blade. They were requesting court-ordered disclosure of my counseling records from the VA readjustment program, my therapy, the thing I had done's right. The thing the Navy spends 14 years telling you to finally stop hiding from. Dressed up in a legal filing as evidence I was unfit. Priya's office smelled like coffee and printer toner, and she doesn't sugarcoat, which is exactly why I hired her. She spread the objection across her desk like a map of hostile terrain. Here's their theory, she said. Absent mother, unstable veteran, shaky transition. They don't have to prove you're dangerous. They just need to make a judge hesitate. I asked how a year of orders I couldn't refuse becomes abandonment. She looked at me over her glasses. Because you're the mother. A father coming home from deployment gets a parade. A mother gets a question mark. It's not written down anywhere, and I watch it walk into courtrooms every single year. The counseling records were from a program I'd done after retirement. Standard readjustment work. The exact thing every commanding officer and every poster on every base wall begs service members to pursue. Priya said they'd request the file and hold whatever was in it up to the worst possible light. They're not attacking your weaknesses, Renata. They're attacking your strengths. Your discipline, your honesty about getting help. They're going to turn every one of them upside down and shake. That night, after Sadie was asleep, I cleared my kitchen table and laid the whole war out where I could see it. On one side, the court filings, their objection, my motion, the guardianship I'd signed at a folding table before Guam. On the other side, I set down what I'd been keeping in the hall closet since the morning after the storm. A gallon freezer bag, zipped shut, holding one small pair of purple sneakers. Still caked in dried mud from a 200-yard run through a downpour. I'd sealed them that first morning without fully understanding why. 14 years of instinct. Preserve the evidence, bag it, log it. Standing at my own table at midnight, I finally understood what I'd actually put in that bag. It was the exact size and weight of what my family called a lesson. I picked up my phone and typed one line to Priya. "We fight all the way." She replied with a thumbs up at 12:20 a.m., and I slept better than I had since the storm. The next hit came from church, of all places. But first came one more piece of mail. The moment this stopped being a custody case for me and became something much older. Their attorney filed a formal response to the CPS involvement, and buried in the standard legal weather was one line I now have memorized. The discipline in question reflects long-standing, reasonable child rearing practice within the respondent's family. Similar discipline never harmed the child's mother. There it was. It never hurt you. Shaved, pressed, and dressed in a suit. My father's kitchen table sentence had crawled into a legal filing, and to him, and now to his lawyers, it wasn't an excuse. It was a defense. A philosophy with a paper trail. I read that line maybe a dozen times and went very still, the way a room goes still when the power cuts. This was never going to be about one Saturday night. Their own filing had guaranteed that. It was going to be about the practice, long-standing, as advertised, which meant it was going to be about the very first child that farmhouse ever latched a door against. Priya called that afternoon with logistics. The county had scheduled home visits at both houses, standard procedure. "Be yourself," she said. "And let Sadie be herself too. That child is the truest witness in this whole file." The investigation ran 2 weeks. I got most of it in pieces. From Coleman's careful updates, from Louise, and later from the file itself. A soft-spoken specialist interviewed Sadie at school, asking her to draw her weekend instead of describe it. She drew the farmhouse, the back porch, rain in hard diagonal pencil strokes, and a small stick figure behind a door with a tiny rectangle where the latch goes. She drew Louise's porch light the size of the sun. Coleman visited my house, checked the fridge, the smoke detectors, Sadie's room with its cloud charts taped over the headboard, and stayed for coffee he didn't have to accept. Then he drove out to County Road 9. "Here's the part I want you to sit with." My father did not soften a single syllable. He walked the caseworker straight to the back porch, showed him the latch, and explained his system the way a man demonstrates a wood splitter. "Kids need weather," he said, on the record, to a child welfare investigator holding a clipboard. "Crying's a habit. Habits break outdoors." My mother served coffee cake, and according to the dry summary I read weeks later, used the word discipline over and over and never once said sorry. Their honesty was the strangest gift anyone handed my case. No cover story to untangle, just the doctrine, delivered plainly in dry weather by the man who wrote it. Rumor beat the county's report to town by 10 full days. My Aunt Deb, my father's sister and Millbrook's unofficial broadcast tower, called me on a Tuesday and opened with, "So it's true you're trying to send your own father to prison?" I told her nobody was going to prison. I was ending a guardianship. She talked over me for 6 straight minutes about respect, about how her generation got the belt and built this whole county anyway. That Sunday, church stopped being abstract. My mother had run the fellowship hall's coffee table at Millbrook Community Church for over 20 years, and those same women had known me since the church nursery. In the cereal aisle at the Piggly Wiggly, 2 of them looked at my cart, looked at me, and rearranged their faces the way you'd cover a casserole with foil. Nobody was rude. Millbrook doesn't do rude, it does quiet, and the quiet has edges. I could carry that. I'd been frozen out of worse rooms by worse people, in worse countries, For less noble reasons. Then it reached my daughter. A birthday party Sadie had been counting down to for 2 weeks. A bounce house, a mermaid cake, the whole second grade social calendar. Gone, evaporated by a text from the birthday girl's mother. So sorry. We had to trim the guest list. Sadie sat at our table with her cloud charts and asked me the question I will be answering for the rest of my life. Did I do something bad? I told her the truth. No, baby. You did something brave. Some grown-ups just can't tell the difference yet. She nodded. Like a little soldier taking an order, which broke something in me worse than tears would have. That same evening, headlights swung into my driveway. Louise, carrying a pie. She set it on my counter, took off her rain bonnet, and said, 30 years teaching second grade, Renata. I know exactly what I saw on my doormat, and I intend to say so to a judge. No drama. Next item of business. Over coffee, she told me things I'd never heard about the kids who'd come through her classroom, already trained not to flinch. Everybody praises those children for being so tough, she said, stirring her cup slowly. I watched the light go out of them one recess at a time. Tough is just what we call it, so we don't have to call it anything else. I wrote that down word for word that night. Some sentences deserve preserving. Sadie's nightmares thinned, some nights to none, once we found her a gentle child counselor 2 towns over with a sand tray and a patient voice. At home? She went back to her weather charts. Big crayon systems with cold fronts and pressure lines. And one evening I noticed she'd started marking a little square on every single map, always the same spot, labeled in careful second grade letters a safe use. It was our house on Larkspur Street. Every storm she drew, our house stood marked, standing, safe. I taped that map inside the cabinet where I keep my coffee, so I'd see it every morning at the worst possible hour. The court appointed a guardian ad litem. A rumpled, watchful man named Otis Greer, whose entire job was to be Sadie's voice in a room full of adults with law degrees. He interviewed me for 2 hours at the house, spent an afternoon at the farm, met Sadie twice, once with her sand tray. He was unreadable in a way I respected and resented in equal measure. Meanwhile, Priya began preparing me for cross-examination, and those evenings in her office were their own kind of combat drill. She played opposing counsel and did not go easy. When were you last in a combat zone, Miss Cole? Do you take medication to sleep? You missed your daughter's 5th birthday, didn't you? Where exactly were you? Describe your nightmares for the court. I sat and took it, round after round. And somewhere in round 3 I recognized the feeling from the worst stretches of deployment. The battlefield was my own personnel file. Every scar I'd earned honestly was now an exhibit. Every wise thing I'd done. The counseling, the careful transition schedule, the phone call to the county, could be flipped upside down and held to the light. Good, Priya said finally, closing her legal pad. You don't rattle. Now go home and sleep. Because tomorrow the other side wants a room. One mediator, one honest attempt to end this without a trial. The mediation room had a long table, bad coffee, and a box of tissues nobody touched. My parents sat across from me with their attorney. A retired judge named Ferris sat at the head and tried, gently, to build a bridge out of thin air. For an hour it went exactly as you'd expect. Then Ferris asked my father, almost softly, whether he understood why that night had frightened people, and instead of answering my father went somewhere else entirely. I was 8, he said, in a voice I had never once heard him use. My own father took me out on Coulter's Pond in February to check trot lines. Ice gave out under me, went in up to my chest. He looked down at his hands on the table, and his hands. I want this on the record. His hands were shaking. He stood on the bank and watched me climb out myself. Then he walked home ahead of me, and I followed his bootprints 2 miles, half frozen. Nobody ever carried me anywhere. For one long second, the room held something almost holy, and I saw him, a boy on a frozen bank 60 years back, waiting for a hand that never came down. I know that boy. I have been that boy. Then my father lifted his chin, and the window closed like weather passing. And it made me a man. He said, voice level again. Everything I am got built on that ice. That's what you're stealing from that little girl, Renata. You're teaching her to wait around to be rescued. He straightened his jacket. I won't apologize for the one thing I know how to do. The mediation collapsed within 10 minutes. In the parking lot, my mother took 3 fast steps toward me, mouth open, hand half raised, then stopped, folded it back into her cardigan sleeve, and walked to my father's truck instead. 2. Litigation is a slow leak, and by the 5th week I could name everything it was draining. Money first. The retainer, the filings, the expert consult, over $11,000 and climbing. A number I tracked on the whiteboard next to my grocery list, because pretending not to know a number has never once made it smaller. Standing in the checkout line at the Piggly Wiggly one Thursday, Aunt Deb held court by the deli case with 2 church ladies, loud enough for me to hear over the sliced turkey. All I'm saying is Earl raised that girl with the same hand, and she turned out just fine, didn't she? One of the women glanced my way, and had the decency to study her shoes. Fine. That word following me around town wearing my mother's voice. It drained me in a deeper way too. I'd served 14 years. 2 of them somewhere I still visit at 3 in the morning. I'd sat through more than one briefing where we begged sailors and Marines to ask for help like it was just another drill. So here's the joke I told my counselor, Marcus, at the vet center that week, the one he didn't laugh at. I had called in a medevac under hostile fire with perfectly steady hands, and it took me 36 years to learn how to make the phone call that just says, "I'm not okay, come sit with me." Asa Marcus, a corpsman from an earlier war than mine, looked at me for a long moment. Then he said the thing I carried straight into that courtroom. "Renata, you keep telling me your father's discipline is what got you through your service. Any chance the service is also what's gotten you through your father?" I was still turning that over on Friday when Priya called with the county's report. Wren County CPS had completed its assessment of substantiated neglect, endangering circumstances, as to Earl Cole. My mother was named in the narrative but listed unsubstantiated. A distinction I understood completely and hated completely. The report cited the storm warning, the latch, the duration, the temperature, the urgent care record, Louise's statement, and my father's own words to the caseworker. Quoted at length because he'd handed them over like a donation to a museum. Kids need weather. The county prosecutor reviewed the file for criminal endangerment and declined to file charges, proving intent beyond reasonable doubt against a 71-year-old grandfather with no record. In front of a jury of his own neighbors was a fight the state didn't want. Substantiated on paper. Prosecuted, never. That's exactly when the other side reached out. Not with a filing this time. With an offer. 2. It came through their attorney on heavy paper, and I'll give it this much, it was smart. My parents would withdraw their objection entirely. The guardianship would terminate by agreement. No trial, no cross-examination, no public record read aloud in open court. I would have full custody within the week. In exchange, a standing visitation arrangement, 1 weekend a month, unsupervised, written into the entry, and a mutual non-disparagement clause. Lawyer language for what happens in this family stays in this family. Priya laid it on her desk, leaned back, and for the first time since I'd hired her, told me to think hard about taking it. Trials are dice, Renata. This paper is certainty. As your lawyer, I'm telling you it's a good deal. And the part of me that had been marching on caffeine and checklists for 6 weeks straight stood at attention and said, "Take it, soldier. Mission accomplished. Bring your daughter home." But I kept reading, and the deal had a shape underneath the shape. 1 weekend a month. My daughter would sleep behind that latch again. With a court's blessing this time. And I would sign away my voice on the way out the door. The silence I'd marinated in my whole childhood, typed up, notarized, and made binding on the next generation. I told Priya I'd answer by 9 the morning of the hearing. I had 1 night left, and I spent it exactly where you'd guess. On the edge of my daughter's bed. Sadie was half asleep under her quilt, her newest weather chart taped to the headboard, our little house marked, SAFHI US in careful capital letters. I was memorizing her face the way you do before a deployment when she surfaced, and looked at me with those steady 7-year-old eyes. "Mama, do I have to go back to Grandpa's farm?" I gave her the honest answer. That a judge was going to help us decide, and that whatever happened, I would be right there. She was quiet a moment, working something out. Then my daughter, 7 years old, 50 pounds, the bravest soul I have ever shared a house with, patted my hand exactly the way my mother pats hands, and said, "It's okay, Mama. If there's another storm, I'll just count the thunder so I don't cry." She said it to comfort Mimi. She'd already packed the lesson into her own little rucksack. Folded it neat. When they lock you out, you don't get rescued. You get quiet. 1 generation. That's all it took. I sat with my sleeping daughter until midnight, then went to the kitchen, picked up the freezer bag with the purple sneakers, held it in my lap like a folded flag, and typed the message to Priya that ended one version of my life and started another. No deal, put me on the stand. In the morning I wore the blazer from my retirement ceremony. The Wren County Probate Court sits on the second floor of a limestone building older than anyone's grievances, and the courtroom is small. Oak benches, a ceiling fan that ticks, a state flag gone soft with age. Everything is public in a room that size. My parents were already seated when I walked in. My father in his funeral and wedding suit, my mother in church blue, Aunt Deb behind them with her arms crossed like a fence. Louise sat on my side in her good coat, spine straight, a second-grade teacher waiting out an assembly. Otis Greer had his notebook open. The caseworker's file sat on the clerk's cart with everything in it. Their attorney intercepted us in the aisle, one last copy of the agreement in hand, and made his pitch quietly, reasonably, the way good lawyers sell certainty. Sign now. Everyone goes home. The family heals in private. I looked past his shoulder while he talked. My mother was watching me, hands clasped at her chest, and she mouthed one word across the courtroom: please. I took the paper from him, laid it on the rail, and across the signature block wrote the word declined in block capitals. Dated it, the way I date everything, and handed it back. My mother closed her eyes. My father never turned around. I watched the back of his neck receive the news and settle, almost satisfied. A fight was a language he understood and respected. Magistrate Rosalind Hale took the bench at 9 sharp, gray-haired and precise, reading glasses on a chain, and called the matter of the guardianship of Sadie Mary Cole, minor child. My father took the stand first, and I'll say this for him, he didn't lie. He sat straight, spoke slow, and laid out his life's philosophy on the record with the pride of a man showing off a wall he'd built himself. Yes, he'd put the child on the porch. Yes, he'd latched the door. A standard correction, he called it. A method with a track record. When his attorney raised the storm, he repeated exactly what he'd told me in his kitchen. Storm's just water. 2 heads in the gallery actually nodded. Then his lawyer turned him toward me, and the real strategy stood up and showed itself. Hadn't his daughter been absent from the child's life a full year? Hadn't the child thrived at the farm? School records, church attendance, a garden she'd helped tend. Wasn't the mother's household barely 7 months old, her civilian job newly started, her own treatment records? He let the word treatment hang there like a stain, and then my father did the thing I knew was coming and still wasn't ready for. He pointed at me, not unkindly, proudly. Look at her, he told the room. 14 years in the United States Navy, steady as a fence post. You think that grew in soft dirt? I built that. My father built me and I built her, and all I was doing that night was building the little one the same way I was built. He was offering me up as his own closing argument. My service, my steadiness, my entire survived life entered into evidence as proof the latch worked. Priya leaned in and gave me the exit one final time. Last chance, Renata. We can rest on the county's file. You don't have to take the stand. Your records stay sealed. I stood up anyway. Nobody in that courtroom knew, not even Priya, because I'd only fully decided it somewhere between the aisle and my own 2 feet. That I was done letting silence be the load-bearing wall of this family. Your Honor, I said, I'd like to testify. And before I do, so no one wonders what I'm hiding, I waive privilege on my counseling records. The VA file, all of it. The court can read every page. The room did that small, town thing where nobody moves and everything shifts anyway. My mother's chair creaked. Their attorney half rose out of his seat, sensing either a gift or a trap and unable to tell which. Priya looked at me for a long second, closed her eyes exactly once, like someone folding a losing hand she'd played perfectly, and said, Petitioner calls Renata Cole. Walking those 15 feet took 27 years. I put my hand on the same Bible my father had used, sat down, adjusted the microphone the way I'd adjusted 100 radios in 100 worse rooms, and set the memory of my daughter's freezer, bagged sneakers on the rail in front of me, where I could see them. Priya's first question was the one we'd rehearsed. State your name and your relationship to the child. Renata Cole. I'm her mother. Her second question was one we had never rehearsed, because I'd whispered a change of plan to her at the council table, not 5 minutes before. Ms. Cole, she said, steady as a metronome. Your father testified his methods never hurt you. Take your time. Tell the court about the smokehouse. My father's head came up. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, and outside the tall second-floor windows, I swear on my discharge papers, it began to rain, soft at first, then steady. I was 8, I said, and my voice held. It was the winter my grandfather died. And until this morning, I had never told this to a single living soul. My grandfather's funeral was on a Thursday. I cried at the graveside. I was 8, and he was the only man who ever let me just sit on his lap and be small. That evening my father told me crying was a habit, and habits break outdoors. There was a storm building up from the river valley. He walked me out to the old smokehouse behind the barn, past the woodpile, put me in with the cured hams and the cold concrete floor, and set the hasp. There was one window, high up, wired glass. I watched the storm through it most of the night. I was still wearing my funeral dress. I counted the thunder. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. Because somewhere in the dark I worked out that if I was counting, I wasn't crying, and if I wasn't crying by morning, the door would open. Toward dawn I fell asleep on a feed sack. When my mother let me out, she brought me cocoa. Nobody in that house ever spoke of it again. I made myself a promise walking back across that yard, 8 years old in a wrinkled funeral dress. Nobody would ever see me cry again. I kept that promise through boot camp, through 2 deployments, through a divorce, through holding a young Marine's hand while he didn't make it home, and through the birth of my own daughter. The nurses joked they'd never seen a calmer delivery in their lives. For 27 years I called that promise strength. I built an entire career on it. And my father just sat in that chair and claimed my whole life as his good work. I turned then and looked at him, the man in his funeral and wedding suit, and kept my voice as soft as I have ever kept it in this life. Dad, you always said it never hurt me. It never stopped hurting me. I went to counseling to unlearn your house. That file they wanted so badly, says a woman, spent 14 years being strong and is finally learning how to be well. Strong and well are not the same thing. And I will spend every dollar I have to make sure my daughter never has to learn the difference. The silence held for one full heartbeat. Then my father came up out of his chair like a wall giving way, and for the first time in my entire life, Earl Cole raised his voice in public. I made you what you are! The gavel came down once. My father stood in the ringing quiet, breathing hard, an 8-year-old boy on a frozen pond wearing a 71-year-old man's face. And every person in that small oak room had just watched the method testify against itself. Too, what remained took under an hour, and I remember it in still frames. Louise on the stand in her good coat, describing the doormat, the soaked pajamas, the blue, tinned lips, in sentences plain enough to carve into limestone. The county's file entered without objection, my father's own words read back into the record while he stared at the flag, and then Otis Greer, unreadable Otis, opening his little notebook to deliver the guardian ad litem's recommendation. The magistrate asked what the child herself had said when asked where she feels safest. Greer found the page. She told me, home is where my mom checks the locks twice. He looked up. Locks that keep the weather out, she said, not locks that keep me out. He closed the notebook. This office recommends termination, Your Honor, and recommends against any court-ordered visitation at this time. Magistrate Hale removed her reading glasses and spoke plainly. The law presumes a fit parent. That presumption had not been dented, and the evidence. She looked at my father over the top of her frames for a long, level moment. Ran considerably the other direction. Guardianship terminated. Full parental rights and custody restored to the mother. The motion for grandparent visitation is denied. She signed the entry right there. 1 page. 1 signature. The clerk's stamp came down with a small mechanical thunk, and that thunk was the whole war ending. I want to tell you that winning felt like fireworks. It felt more like a field going quiet. My mother walked past me in the aisle, purse held in both hands like something pulled from a fire, and did not look at me once. I understood I had just heard her voice for the last time, in a courtroom or maybe anywhere at all. My father stopped at the door and did look. A long look, no shout left in it. And in his eyes I finally saw the real cost of that day, the one line no entry could ever restore. The father I had spent 36 years imagining, the one who was hard because someday he'd tell me it had all been for love. That man had never actually existed. I had the signed page in my hand. Both things were true at once. I carried them both out into the rain. 2. I won't dress up what came after, because real endings don't tie off neatly. My father never apologized, not that week, not since. At Millbrook Community Church, some pews still go quiet when I walk past, and Aunt Deb still tells her version of events over the deli case. The doctrine didn't die in that courtroom, it just lost one house. I went fully no contact the day the entry was stamped, numbers blocked. School pickup list rewritten down to 2 names, mine and Louise's. One morning in June, I found a cardboard box on my porch. No note, no knock. Inside were things from the farm, my old 4-H ribbons, a christening gown, a photograph of me at 6 on my grandfather's lap, my mother's handwriting on the flaps, my mother's tape, my mother's silence. I stood there a long time, then kept the photograph, donated the rest, and let the box be exactly what it was. The closest thing to a love letter that house ever learned how to send. The rebuilding was quieter than the war, the way it always is. Sadie kept her sand tray appointments, and the nightmares faded from tenants to occasional visitors. I started work with a regional clinic network. Civilian hours, home by 5:30. I still see Marcus at the vet center every other Thursday. And I'm faster now at making the hard call, the one that just says come sit with me. One Saturday, Sadie and I held a small ceremony in the backyard for a pair of purple sneakers. I finally unzipped the freezer bag. We thanked them for their service. She saluted. I'd taught her a proper one, for carrying a brave girl 200 yards through the mud to a porch light. Then we retired them, full honors, into the trash bin, and drove to the store where she picked her own replacement pair. Purple again, but louder. Her choice. Everything about that sentence still gets me. Her choice. In late July, a storm rolled up the valley on a Friday evening, the first big one since April. I watched my daughter watch the sky and asked if she wanted to go inside. She thought about it like the meteorologist she's decided to become, then shook her head and climbed up onto the porch swing beside me. So we stayed. 2 coal women under one dry roof. Cocoa in thick July air. The front door standing wide open behind us, the porch light on. When the first thunder rolled, Sadie grinned and started counting. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. Out loud, theatrical, holding up fingers, and I counted right along with her. When we lost track, we just laughed and started over. Counting thunder used to be what the children of that farmhouse did in the dark to keep themselves from crying. Now it's a game my daughter plays on a porch swing with her mother, door wide open, keeping score of how far away the weather really is. In this house, a storm is just weather. In this house, nobody stands outside alone. If you take one thing from my story, take this: being strong carried me through 14 years of service, but it took my daughter shivering on a neighbor's porch to teach me that a child doesn't need toughening. She needs to be safe, and the bravest thing a strong woman can ever do is admit where her strength actually came from. That's my story. One storm, one phone call, one promise I finally broke, the promise to stay quiet.